Welcome to subscribe. Continually we updated.
You ever sit in a restaurant and feel like you don't belong? I mean, really belong. Like the napkins are judging you, and the waiter knows you don't know which fork to use first. That's exactly where I was last Sunday. The Four Seasons brunch. My son Danny's idea. Well, not his idea. His wife Tiffany's idea. Everything in Danny's life these days was Tiffany's idea. Now, I'm Frank. Retired mailman. 38 years walking the same route over on Maple and Oak. My knees are shot, my truck's older than my son, and I like my eggs scrambled, not poached in some fancy vinegar water. But I put on my one good button-down shirt, the one my wife picked out for me before she passed, and I went. Because Danny asked me to. Look, I knew what I was walking into. Tiffany's parents, Richard and Linda, were in town from Scottsdale. Richard sold some tech company a few years back and never let anyone forget it. He walked into that dining room like he owned the place, shaking hands with the maitre d' like they were old golf buddies. He had on a blue blazer with a gold crest on the pocket. Some country club I'd never heard of. Linda was right behind him, holding a little purse that probably cost more than my first truck. She air-kissed me and said, "Frank, dear, you look so comfortable." You know what that means. We sat down at this big round table with a white tablecloth so stiff you could crack it like an egg. Tiffany was already in control. She had that smile on her face, the one that looks sweet but ends just below her eyes. She ordered for everyone before we even opened the menu. Bottomless mimosas. She kept touching Danny's arm and saying things like, "My husband the teacher," in a way that made it sound like he was collecting trash on the side of the highway. Richard got going about 5 minutes in. He always did. You know, Frank, the economy's just punishing the little guy these days. Inflation, interest rates. A man can't get ahead unless he's got skin in the game. Real estate, private equity, that sort of thing. He spread butter on a piece of bread like he was closing a business deal. I keep telling my friends, if you're not leveraged, you're not living. I just nodded. Sipped my coffee. It was the kind of coffee that costs more than a gallon of gas, but it tasted bitter to me anyway. Tiffany jumped in, her voice all sugary and sharp at the same time. Daddy's been so smart with his investments. It's how we were able to help with the down payment on our house. You know, in Oakwood Estates. She looked right at me when she said it. I knew what she was doing. I wasn't born yesterday. She wanted me to feel small. Like my contribution to Danny's life didn't measure up. Like the years I spent working overtime so he could have braces and go to state college didn't count. And then she said it. The thing that's been rattling around in my head all week. Frank, you know, Danny tells me you're still just living off your pension and Social Security. It's kind of useless, isn't it? I mean, in this economy. You can't really do anything with that. She laughed, this little tinkling laugh that sounded like ice cubes hitting crystal. I guess it kept the lights on back in the day, but now? It's like having a horse and buggy on the freeway. Linda put her hand on Tiffany's arm. Tiff, honey, be nice. But she was smiling too. Richard chuckled. Well, a pension's better than nothing, I suppose. It's an antique. Like a rotary phone. Respectable, but obsolete. Danny's face turned red. He stared at his plate. Dad's done just fine, he mumbled. But nobody listened to him. They never did. I sat there, my hands resting on the table, looking at my fork. I could feel something in my chest, but it wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was that old familiar feeling from when I used to work at the post office and some new supervisor would come in, fresh out of training, telling me how to sort mail faster. You just let them talk. You let them use up all their air. Because sooner or later, the mail always gets delivered. I thought about my wife, Carol. She passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer. It was fast and it was brutal. We spent everything we had on treatments that didn't work, on a hospital bed in the living room so she could see her garden. And when it was over, I sat in that empty house with a pile of bills and a broken heart. But I never borrowed a dime. Never asked anyone for help. Because Carol and we had a little secret. Something nobody knew about, not even Danny. We called it our peace of mind fund. But that Sunday, I just kept quiet. I let Tiffany order her lobster eggs Benedict. I let Richard talk about his portfolio like it was the gospel. I let Linda ask me if I'd ever considered one of those reverse mortgage things, just to have a little fun money. And I smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. The waiter brought the bill. Richard made a big show of reaching for it, but then he remembered that his wallet was in the car. Danny looked panicked. His teacher's salary didn't cover a $200 per person brunch. I saw Tiffany's jaw tighten. She was about to snap at him. So I reached into my old worn-out wallet, the leather one Danny gave me for Father's Day 20 years ago, and I pulled out a card. Nothing fancy. Just a plain blue debit card from the credit union. I've got it, I said. Quiet. Like I was offering to grab a coffee at a diner. Tiffany's eyes went wide for a second, then she laughed. Frank, you can't be serious. This bill's probably more than your monthly check. I handed the card to the waiter without looking at her. It'll be fine. The waiter came back a minute later. I'm sorry, sir, do you have another card? This one didn't go through for the full amount. There seems to be a hold limit on daily transactions over $5,000. The table went quiet. Not because the card was declined. But because of what the waiter said. Over $5,000. Richard stopped mid-sentence. His mouth was still open. Linda's fork froze halfway to her mouth with a piece of melon on it. Tiffany looked at the waiter, then at me, then at the card in my hand. Oh, I said. Sorry about that. These credit union cards, they're kind of touchy about big purchases. Fraud protection and all. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Just an old-fashioned bank statement I'd grabbed from the mail pile that morning. I'd been meaning to toss it, but I'd stuck it in my pocket when I left the house. Let me use a different card. The statement slipped out of my hand and landed on the white tablecloth, right next to the butter dish. Face up. The numbers were right there for anyone to read. The account balance at the top of the page. 6 figures. No, 7. And not starting with a 1. Richard leaned forward. I saw his eyes move across the numbers. He blinked. Then he blinked again. His tan face went gray, like old hamburger meat left out too long. He picked up the statement without asking, holding it closer. His hand was shaking just a little. This is your checking account, he said. His voice cracked on the word checking. Yeah, I said, taking the statement back and folding it up again. I've got a few others. That one's just for the day-to-day stuff. I pulled out another card and handed it to the waiter. Try this one. The waiter ran it. It went through fine. The whole time, nobody said a word. Tiffany kept staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Her face was pale, and her smile was long gone. Danny looked confused but hopeful, like a dog who'd just seen his owner open the treat jar. Richard cleared his throat. Frank, I didn't realize you were so, well, comfortable. He said it just like Linda had said it to me earlier, but the meaning was different now. It tasted different. I stood up, folding my napkin and placing it on the table. I'm just a retired mailman, Richard. With an antique pension and a rotary phone. You said it yourself. I put my hand on Danny's shoulder. Danny, I'll see you next Saturday for the barbecue. I'm firing up the old smoker. I walked out of that restaurant with my head up. The sun outside felt warm on my face. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't have a plan. But I knew one thing for sure, that Sunday brunch was just the first course. The real meal was still to come. And I had a feeling Richard and Tiffany were going to choke on it. The Saturday of the barbecue came around faster than I expected. I spent the morning out back, tinkering with the old smoker, scrubbing the grill grates, and mixing up my dry rub. The recipe was Carol's. I don't cook much anymore, mostly just for myself, but when I do it her way. It helps me remember her. Not in that sad, teary way you see in movies. More like, she's still in the kitchen, humming, telling me I'm using too much paprika. Danny showed up an hour early. He brought a 6-pack of cheap beer, the kind I like, and a plastic tub of potato salad from the grocery store. He looked tired. Not just tired from getting up early on a Saturday. Tired in his bones. The kind of tired that comes from living with a woman who never lets you rest. "Hey, Dad," he said, setting the stuff on the picnic table. "Hey, kid. You look like you've been hauling mail in a snowstorm." He laughed a little. "Feels like it." He didn't mention the brunch. I didn't either. We both knew it was the elephant on the patio. He just helped me pull some lawn chairs out of the garage and we sat for a minute in the quiet. The sprinkler was ticking away on the grass. The neighbor's dog, a big dopey yellow lab named Gus, was barking at a squirrel again. It felt peaceful. The calm before the storm. "Dad," Danny finally said, staring at his beer bottle, "you don't have to do this, you know. You don't have to have them over." "I want to," I said. "Your mother always said you can't understand people if you don't break bread with them. Or in this case, burnt ends." He shook his head. "It's just. Tiffany's dad, Richard, he's been on my case lately. Wants me to quit teaching and come work for one of his ventures. Says I'm wasting my potential. That I'll never afford the kind of life Tiffany deserves on my salary." I took a slow breath. "And what do you think?" He didn't answer right away. He peeled a corner of the label off his bottle. "I love teaching, Dad. I love my students. But sometimes I feel like, what kind of man can't give his wife the things her parents gave her? Your mother and I never had a fancy house. We never took luxury vacations. And she was the happiest person I've ever known." I looked over at him. A real man doesn't let someone else tell him what kind of life is worth living. Not even his wife. He didn't look convinced. But he didn't argue either. A little while later, a big, shiny black SUV pulled into my driveway. The kind that never sees a dirt road. Richard, Linda, and Tiffany piled out like they were arriving at a charity gala. Richard was wearing a bright pink polo shirt with a little country club logo, khaki shorts, and loafers without socks. Linda had on a big sun hat and sunglasses that probably cost more than my first pickup. Tiffany was in a white sundress that looked ridiculous next to a smoker. She carried a bottle of wine that I knew I'd never open. They all hugged Danny like they hadn't seen him in years. When they got to me, the hugs were lighter, the smiles a little tighter. "Frank, your home is so cozy," Linda said, looking at my 40-year-old ranch house. Cozy. That's a word rich people use when they mean small. "Works for me," I said. "Smoker's ready. Pull up a chair." Richard strolled around the backyard, hands in his pockets, like he was surveying a property he might buy and tear down. "You know, Frank, I was just telling Tiff the other day, you need to think about selling this place. The market's hot. You could probably get a nice little condo downtown. Less upkeep." "I built this deck with my own hands," I said, flipping a rack of ribs. "I know every creaky board. I'm not selling." "Suit yourself," he said, settling into a chair. "But you're sitting on equity. You know, I've got a guy who could help you leverage that. Turn one house into a portfolio of rental properties." He winked at Danny. "Teach your father-in-law here a little something about the new economy." Here we go, I thought. I served up the ribs and brisket and smoked sausage. The food was good. Even they had to admit it. For a while, we just ate and talked about nothing. The weather, the neighborhood, some new restaurant downtown that charged $50 for a hamburger. Richard was telling a long story about a deal he almost made last month. Something about commercial real estate and a big box store that wanted to back out at the last minute. He acted like he was the hero of the story, the guy who saved the day with his quick thinking and his lawyer. I noticed Danny staying quiet. Tiffany was on her phone half the time, taking pictures of her plate for whatever social media thing she does. Farmhouse chic, she said, tagging the location. I didn't know what that meant, but she made my backyard sound like some kind of theme park. When we were finishing up, Richard leaned back and patted his stomach. Not bad, Frank. Not bad at all. You know, for a simple country barbecue. Linda laughed her polite little laugh. Dear, be nice. I'm being nice, Richard said. I'm just saying, a man who works with his hands deserves a good meal. I let that one slide. I stood up and said, I've got some homemade peach cobbler inside. Carol's recipe. Let me grab it. I walked into the kitchen. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. Stay calm, Frank. This is what you planned. I pulled the cobbler out of the oven where it had been staying warm. Then I opened the drawer where I kept my mail. I reached in and pulled out a stack of papers. A few bank statements. I looked at them for a second. Then I tucked them under my arm, along with the cobbler. As I walked back out, I made sure to stumble just a little on the deck step. Not a big stumble. Just enough to make me drop everything. The cobbler dish landed on the grass, still fine. But the papers went flying. A gust of wind caught them and scattered them across the lawn. Danny jumped up to help. Dad, you okay? Fine, fine. Just clumsy, I said, stooping down. I saw Richard lean over and pick up one of the papers that had blown near his chair. I saw his eyes go wide just for a second before he hit it. He stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. Linda noticed. Richard, what is it? He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring. Then he looked up at me. His face had gone a little pale under his golf course tan. Frank, he said, his voice lower than before, is this your monthly statement? I played dumb. Oh, that. Yeah, just some bank paperwork. Sorry, let me take that. I reached for it, but he held on. This is a checking account statement, he said. He pointed to a number at the bottom. Your available balance is $780,000. The whole backyard went quiet. The only sound was Gus barking at his squirrel again. Tiffany stopped typing on her phone. Her head snapped up. What? It's just my rainy day fund, I said, very calm. I took the paper from Richard's hand. Nothing special. Richard stood up. Frank, that's not a rainy day fund. That's a flood fund. What are you doing with that kind of money sitting in a checking account? You're losing money to inflation every day. You need to be in the market. You need a diversified portfolio. I can help you. There it was. The hunger. The gleam in his eye. The opportunity he smelled. I tucked the statements back under my arm. I'm pretty happy where it is. Tiffany looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Her eyes darted between me and Danny. Danny, did you know about this? Danny shook his head slowly. No. I had no idea. But you paid for brunch, Tiffany said to me, her voice getting higher. That was from this account? I told you, I said, I've got enough. Linda was fanning herself with her hat. Well, she said, I guess postal workers must be paid better than we thought. She laughed nervously. Not really, I said. I just had a smart wife and a lot of patience. Richard was trying to get his confidence back. He put his hand on my shoulder, like we were old buddies. Listen, Frank, I was being serious about the portfolio. You could be making so much more. I'm putting together a little fund right now, boutique investment group. Primarily focused on high-growth tech startups. Minimum buy-in is $500,000. You'd be perfect. I don't know much about tech startups, I said. I just buy what I understand. What does that mean? He asked, his eyes narrowing. You know. The boring stuff. I shrugged and walked back to the smoker to check the temperature. I could feel all their eyes on my back. I was playing this just right. Danny found his voice. Dad, what does Mom have to do with this? I turned around. The question lingered in the air. I looked at my son. Your mother, Carol, she was the smart one. When we got married, we didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. But she always said, Frank, we don't need to be rich to be happy. We just need to make sure we never have to be afraid. So we started a little fund. Just a little. Every paycheck, a portion went in. And we bought things. Things that people always need. Phones. Water. Electricity. And we left it alone. For 42 years. Richard looked confused. You're telling me you just bought utility stocks? That's your big secret? That's like my grandfather's strategy. Your grandfather's strategy paid for his grandson's golf clubs, I said, smiling. I held his gaze. Funny how that works. I saw his face twitch. He was trying to do the math in his head, trying to figure out how much I really had. He knew a checking account with that much money didn't just happen. It was like the tip of an iceberg. And for a guy like Richard, who lived on leverage and debt, an iceberg sitting in a quiet little ranch house on Maple Street was the scariest thing he'd ever encountered. Linda was the one who finally broke the silence. Well, I think we should be going. Richard, honey, we have that dinner tonight at the club, remember? Yeah, Richard said, not taking his eyes off me. Yeah. The club. Tiffany kissed Danny goodbye, but her heart wasn't in it. She was already on her phone again, probably texting her mother. As they walked to the SUV, Richard turned back one more time. Frank, he said, I'd love to take a look at that portfolio of yours someday. Just for old time's sake. Man to man. Maybe I could learn something from you. Maybe, I said. But I've got to warn you. My investment strategies are about as exciting as watching grass grow. He laughed, but it didn't sound real. Then he got in the car, and they drove away. Danny helped me clean up. We didn't talk much. Eventually, he said, Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? Because money shouldn't be the reason you do anything, I said. It's just a tool. Your mother and I wanted you to find your own way, without knowing there was a safety net. That's the only way you become your own man. He nodded slowly. So when you talked about what a real man does. I wasn't just talking about you, Danny. I put my arm around his shoulder. I was talking to the man I want you to be. And that man doesn't let anyone, not his wife or her father, tell him his value. He stood there for a long time, looking at the grass. Something was changing in him. I could see it in the way he held his shoulders. A little straighter. But I also knew that Richard wasn't done. A man like that, he gets a taste of something he doesn't understand, and he can't stop chewing on it. He was going to come back. And when he did, I'd be ready. Because that checking account was nothing. It was just the change I kept in the cup holder of my truck. The real story, the one that would turn their whole world upside down, was still sitting in a dusty old filing cabinet in my garage. And I had a feeling I'd be opening that drawer sooner rather than later. It took Richard exactly 4 days. 4 days of what I imagine was him sitting in that big fancy house of his, staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, doing the math in his head. A man like Richard, he can't let go of a mystery. Especially a mystery wrapped in money. And especially when that money belongs to an old mailman who he'd already decided was beneath him. He showed up on a Thursday afternoon. No phone call. No warning. Just the sound of that German engine pulling into my driveway, purring like a cat that knows it's better than you. I was in the garage, changing the oil on my truck. You know, the kind of thing a man does when he wants to think. I had the radio on, some old country station, and I was just finishing up when I heard his footsteps on the concrete. Frank. He was wearing another one of those golf shirts, this one a shade of yellow you only see on people who've never done a day of real work outdoors. Got a minute? I wiped my hands on a rag. Depends on what you need the minute for. He laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind of laugh a man gives when he's trying to buy something and doesn't want the seller to know how bad he wants it. Straight to the point. I like that. Mind if I sit? I pointed to an old folding chair near my workbench. He looked at it like it might bite him, but he sat down anyway. Nice place you got here, he said, looking around my garage. Simple. Honest. It's a garage, Richard. It's got oil stains and a lawnmower that's older than my son. You didn't drive all the way across town to compliment my garage. He nodded, crossing his legs. His shoes were the kind that cost more than my first car. You're right. I came to talk. Man to man. About what you were saying at the barbecue. I said a lot of things at the barbecue. About the stocks, he said, leaning forward a little. The communication company. The utility. The way you just held them. For decades. I've been thinking about that. A lot. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the best thing you can do in a negotiation is let the other guy fill the silence. It's amazing what people will tell you if you just let them keep talking. He uncrossed his legs. Crossed them again. Look, Frank, I'm going to be honest with you. The last couple of years, some of my investments, they haven't gone the way I planned. The market's been tough. Real estate's cooling off. And I've got a lot of leverage. You know what leverage is? I know it means you borrowed money. Exactly. He nodded, too fast. And when you borrow money, when things go south, the bank doesn't care how many country clubs you belong to. They just want their check. And right now, I'm looking at some, let's call them cash flow issues. There it was. The confession. The big shot. The guy who'd made fun of my pension. The man who'd taught his daughter to look down on a working man's life. He was in trouble. And now he was sitting in my oil-stained garage, trying to figure out how to get his hands on what I had. So what do you want from me, Richard? He took a deep breath. I want to see it. Your portfolio. What you actually own. You said those shares were just the beginning, right? The 87,000 was, what did you call it? Change in the cup holder. Yeah. That. He swallowed. So what's the rest? I mean, you've been buying these stocks since the 70s or 80s, right? With dividends reinvested, I ran some numbers. If you were consistent, if you kept adding, I mean, do you even know what that could be worth now? I stood up. Walked over to the corner of the garage. There it was. The old filing cabinet. Gray metal. Bought it at a government surplus auction back in 1982 for $15. It had a little rust on the bottom, and the top drawer always stuck a little when you tried to open it. This is it, I said. Richard stared at it. What's in there? Everything. I pulled open the top drawer. It made that screeching sound it always makes, like it's complaining about being woken up. Inside, there were hanging folders. Dozens of them. Each one labeled by year. 1978, 1979. 1980, all the way up to last year. I pulled out the first folder. Set it on the workbench. This is 1978, I said. First year I bought shares in the communication company. You know how much I put in? $500. That was a lot of money for a new mailman with a baby on the way. Carol and me, we sat at the kitchen table and argued about it for 3 hours. She wanted to put it in a savings account. I said we needed to own something. Something real. I opened the folder. Inside were the original stock certificates. Paper certificates, from before everything went digital. The company name had changed twice since then, through mergers and reorganizations, but the shares just kept rolling forward. Every month, I said, I sent them another $50. Sometimes $100, if we had it. And every quarter, the dividends came. At first it was nothing. $12. $20. But we never touched it. We just bought more shares. And those shares paid more dividends. And those dividends bought more shares. I pulled out another folder. 1985, another one. 1992, when the internet started, everybody laughed at me. Said I should be buying tech stocks. .com this, startup that. My own son asked me once, Dad, why don't you invest in something exciting? You know what I told him? Richard shook his head. His face was pale now. I told him, son, people will always need to make phone calls. And people will always need electricity. Everything else is just noise. I pulled out a sheet from 2003. Showed it to him. The numbers on it were getting bigger now. The dividend reinvestment was really starting to snowball. 1,000 shares became 2,000. 2,000 became 5. When Carol got sick, I said, my voice getting a little quieter, we had a choice. The treatments were expensive. Not everything was covered by insurance. A lot of people, they'd have to sell the house. Borrow from family. Go into debt. I pulled out another folder. 2010, the year she died. But we didn't have to do any of that. Because of this. I tapped the folder. This boring, slow, useless pile of paper paid for every single treatment. It let her stay in a good hospital. It let me take time off work to be with her. And when she passed, I still had something left. Not because I was smart. Not because I was lucky. But because I was patient. Richard was staring at the folders like they were gold bars. Which, in a way, they were. How much, he whispered. Total. Across all of this. I pulled out the most recent statement. The one from last month. Set it down in front of him. He looked at the number at the bottom. And I watched his face. I've seen a lot of expressions in my life. I saw the look on Danny's face when he first held his mother's hand as a little boy. I saw the look on Carol's face when the doctor told her the diagnosis. I saw the look on my own face in the mirror the morning after she died. But I've never seen a look quite like the one on Richard's face right then. It was like watching a balloon deflate. His mouth opened a little. Closed. Opened again. He picked up the statement, and his hands were actually shaking. This can't be right. It's right. But Frank, this is millions. This is multiple millions. I know what it is, Richard. From a postman's salary? From $50 a month? How is that even possible? 45 years, I said. 45 years of never selling. Never panicking. Never trying to be the smartest guy in the room. Just buying the same two things, over and over and over. It's not complicated. It's just hard. Because most people can't stand being bored. They want action. They want excitement. They want to feel like they're winning. I looked him straight in the eye. But real winning, I said, doesn't feel like winning. It feels like doing the same boring thing every month for 45 years, while everybody else is chasing whatever's shining this week. And then one day you wake up, and you don't owe anybody a damn thing. That's what winning feels like. He didn't say anything. He just kept staring at that number. And that's when I heard it. A sound from just outside the garage door. Quiet, but not quiet enough. Tiffany. She must have followed her father. Probably parked down the street, worried about what he was doing. Or maybe she just wanted to hear for herself. Either way, she was standing right there, just behind the door, and she'd heard every single word. I walked over and pulled the door open. She almost fell inside. Her face was, I don't have the words for it. It was like watching someone realize that a door they'd slammed shut 20 times had actually been made of solid gold the whole time. And now it was locked, and they couldn't get in. "Mrs. Benson," I said. I used her formal name on purpose. No more Tiffany. No more pretending we were family. "Mr. Benson," she said, her voice tiny. I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did." I wasn't angry. I was just tired. "You wanted to hear if your father was going to get something from me. You wanted to know if there was a way to turn this into something you could use." She looked at Richard. He couldn't even meet her eyes. He was still holding that statement, still staring at it, still trying to figure out how his whole world had turned upside down in a dusty garage on a Thursday afternoon. "Daddy?" Her voice cracked. "What's happening? What are you doing here?" He finally looked up. And the look he gave her, it wasn't a father looking at his daughter. It was a man who'd just realized he'd spent 30 years building a house of cards, and someone had just opened the window. "I was asking for advice," he said quietly. "From a man who apparently knows a lot more about money than I do." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered that brunch. The way Tiffany had held up my pension like it was a piece of garbage. The way Richard had laughed, that rich man's laugh, the one that says "I've got mine and you'll never have yours." The way Danny had shrunk in his chair, little by little, until he looked like he wanted to disappear. "Here's what's going to happen now," I said. "You're both going to leave. And when you go home tonight, Tiffany, I want you to think real hard about how you treat my son. Because Danny's not just your husband. He's my boy. And everything I have, everything in these drawers, it's not for me. It's for him. And for his children someday, if he has any." Tiffany's eyes went wide at that. Because she understood exactly what I was saying. All those years of making Danny feel small, of making him feel like he wasn't good enough, she'd been stomping on a lottery ticket she'd already won. "But here's the thing," I continued. "He's not going to get it because he asked for it. He's not going to get it because you maneuvered for it. He's going to get it when he's ready. When he understands what it actually means. And right now, I'm not sure he does. Because he married you without understanding what kind of family you came from." I turned to Richard. "You want advice? Here it is. Sell those cars. Sell the country club membership. Sell the house if you have to. Get out of debt. Stop pretending you're something you're not. Because the only thing that's real in this world is what you own outright. And right now, you don't own a damn thing. You're just renting it all, from the bank." He nodded slowly. Put the statement down on the workbench. "I'll see myself out," he said. Tiffany stood there for another second, looking at me, looking at the filing cabinet, looking at her father's back as he walked out. I could see her doing the calculations. How much of this could she salvage? How could she spin this? Was it worth staying married to Danny if it meant maybe, someday, getting access to all of this? "Go home, Mrs. Benson," I said. "And tell my son I'll call him tomorrow." She left without another word. After they were gone, I sat down in that old chair and looked at the filing cabinet. The sun was starting to go down, and the garage was getting dark. I should have turned on the light. But I just sat there for a while, in the quiet. Carol would have laughed, I think. She never liked Richard. Met him once, at the wedding, and told me afterward, that man's smile doesn't reach his eyes. She was always better at reading people than I was. I thought about what she'd said, all those years ago, when we were just starting out. We don't need to be rich. We just need to not be afraid. And she was right. That's what the money was really for. Not yachts. Not fancy cars. Not brunches at places that charge $40 for eggs. It was for this. For sitting in a garage at sunset, knowing that no one in the world could make me feel small. Knowing I'd kept my promise to the woman I loved. Knowing that somewhere out there, a man who'd laughed at my pension was now driving home with a very different expression on his face. I locked up the filing cabinet. Put the key back on the hook where it's been hanging for 40 years. Then I went inside, made myself a sandwich, and watched the evening news. Just like any other Thursday. Because that's the thing about real wealth. It doesn't change you. It just lets you be exactly who you already are. And I've always been fine with who I am.